If you watch Fortnite pros, it's almost like they're playing a completely different game than you. They move differently, think differently, and most importantly, they do a lot of small things you probably don't even realize matter. And that's exactly why you feel stuck. So in this video, I'm breaking down 10 things pros do every single day that you probably don't. And once you start copying these, your gameplay is going to feel way more controlled, way more confident, and way less random. So let's hop right into it. The first thing pros do that you don't is abuse movement in every single fight. And this goes way deeper than just move more or don't stand still. Pros are constantly using movement to create advantages before the fight even really starts. When they're approaching someone, they're already thinking about angles, elevation, how they can make themselves harder to hit while still being able to apply pressure. They'll take slightly off-center positions so they're not giving you a clean shot. They'll crouch at unexpected times to mess with your crosshair placement, and they'll use quick directional changes to throw off your timing. And what makes this even more powerful is how consistent they are with it. It's not something they only do when they remember, it's automatic. Every peek, every shot, every reset has movement built into it. They also understand when to speed up and when to slow down. If they sense you're uncomfortable, they'll increase the pace and overwhelm you. If they feel like they're in control, they'll slow it down and force you into making a mistake. And one of the biggest differences is how they disengage. Most players either fully commit or fully run away, but pros know how to partially disengage. They'll take a step back, heal, reposition, and then come right back into the fight from a better angle. That constant repositioning is what makes them so hard to deal with. If you feel like your fights are chaotic or you're always getting hit first, it's probably because your movement isn't intentional like theirs is. Once you start treating movement like a tool instead of just something you do, everything about your fights starts to feel way more controlled. The second thing is using optimal edits and builds, and this is where a lot of players think they're better than they actually are. You might be able to do fast edits in creative, but that doesn't mean your edits are good in real fights. Pros focus on edits that give them an advantage, not just ones that look impressive. Every edit they make is either creating a safe angle, applying pressure, or setting up their next move. They're constantly thinking about right hand peeks, making sure they're exposing as little of their body as possible while still being able to shoot. And they don't just edit randomly, they chain their edits together in a way that keeps them protected the entire time. Another big difference is their builds. Pros place builds with purpose. They're not just spamming walls and ramps like most of you are. They're placing specific pieces to control the entire fight. They're thinking about piece control, about cutting off your escape routes, about forcing you into positions where they have the advantage. And they're always ready to reset. If something doesn't go their way, they instantly rebuild, close angles, and take back control. A lot of players panic when their first play doesn't work out, but pros expect that. They're always ready for the next step, and that's why their fights feel so smooth and controlled. If your fights feel messy, it's usually because your edits and builds don't have the same level of intention. You're reacting instead of planning, and that's something you need to fix if you want to improve. The third thing is actually warming up, but doing it in the right way. Don't just hop into a random map and mess around for a few minutes. They warm up with purpose. They're focusing on consistency, on getting their mechanics to a point where they feel reliable before they even queue into a real game. They'll go through specific routines that target their weaknesses, whether that's aim, edits, or piece control, and they don't rush it. And I just posted a video on a perfect guide and a perfect routine, so make sure you guys go check that out after this video. They make sure they actually feel ready before they move on. Because the reality is, if you go into a game cold, you're already at a huge disadvantage. If your aim isn't locked in, your edits feel slightly off, and your reactions are slower, that might not seem like a big deal. But in a game like Fortnite, those small differences decide the fights. And once you start losing fights early, it affects your confidence overall, which then affects your decision making. Pros eliminate that problem completely. They make sure they're at a baseline before they even start playing seriously. And another thing they do is they simulate real situations in their warm-ups. They're not just freebuilding, they're putting themselves in scenarios that actually translate to in-game fights. That's why their mechanics feel so consistent when it matters. If you've been skipping warm-ups or doing them without a plan, this is one of the easiest things you guys can fix that will instantly improve your gameplay. And if you're actually getting value from this video and you're starting to realize what's been holding you back, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subs by the end of the year, and it genuinely helps more than you think. Alright, the fourth thing is practicing scrims. This is where real improvement starts to happen for most players. Ranked can only take you so far because the environment isn't consistent. Some games are stacked, some aren't. Some players play seriously, others don't. Scrims give you a much more controlled environment where you can actually practice the parts of the game that matter most in competitive play. You're learning how to rotate properly, how to manage your resources, how to position yourself for endgame, and how to survive in lobbies where players aren't just running at each other. And one of the biggest benefits of scrims is that they force you to think ahead. You can't just react to what's happening. You need to have a plan. You need to know where you're going, where you're rotating, and how you're going to handle different situations. And over time, this builds a level of game sense that you can't get from just playing ranked. Another thing scrim teaches you is discipline. You learn when not to fight, which is just as important as knowing when to fight. If you've ever felt lost in tournaments or overwhelmed in stacked games, it's probably because you haven't spent enough time in scrim environments. Once you start incorporating this into your practice, you'll notice a huge difference in how you approach the game. The fifth thing is full focus during tournaments and ranked. And this is something most players completely underestimate. You might think you're focused, but there's a difference between playing and being fully locked in. Pros eliminate distractions completely. When they're in a game, that's all they're thinking about. They're not checking their phone, they're not talking to friends, they're not letting their mind drift. And this level of focus allows them to pick up on small details that most other players miss. They hear audio cues more clearly. They notice patterns in how players move and they react faster because their brain is fully engaged in the game. And another big part of this is how they handle mistakes. When something goes wrong, they don't dwell on it. They instantly reset mentally and focus on the next play, except for like Vino or Clicks when they rage a little bit. They stay present, and that's why they're consistent. Not because they never make mistakes, they all do, but because they don't let those mistakes spiral into bigger problems. If you want to improve, you need to start treating your games with the same level of focus. And real quick, I just wanted to say this video is sponsored by Risen's Tweaks. If your game doesn't feel as smooth as it should, or your input delay feels even slightly off, this is something you should seriously look into. Pros like Krillian use it, and it's a full optimization that makes your game feel way more responsive, which can give you a real advantage in fights where timing matters. A lot of players are already using this to get that extra edge, and it's one of those things that you can actually feel immediately. If you want to try it out, use code FLOW at checkout or click the link in the description or bio and you'll get 15% off. Alright, let's get back into the video. The 6 things pros do is manage their fights instead of chasing them. And this is one of the biggest differences in mindset between average players and higher level players. Pros don't fight just because they can. They fight because it actually makes sense. They're constantly evaluating risk versus reward. If a fight is going to take too long, it's going to leave them exposed. Or if it's not necessary, they won't take it. And when they do take fights, they're looking to end them quickly and cleanly. They don't want drawn out battles that attract attention or drain their resources for later parts of the game. Another big part of this is how they recognize when a fight is no longer worth it. Most players get stuck in the mindset of, I'm already committed, so I have to finish this. Pros don't think like that. If the situation changes, they adapt to that situation. They disengage, reset, and look for a better opportunity. And this is the ability to manage fights instead of forcing them is what allows them to stay alive longer and play more consistently. If you feel like you're constantly dying in situations that feel avoidable, this is something you definitely need to work on immediately. The 7th thing is constantly tracking information, and this is where pros really separate themselves mentally from everyone else. They're always aware of what's happening around them. They're listening for footsteps, paying attention to builds, watching rotations, thinking about what other players might do next, and this allows them to stay one step ahead. They're not just reacting, they're predicting everything that could happen in the game. They're thinking about where threats might come from, where safe zones are, and how the game is likely to play out. And this awareness gives them a huge advantage because they're rarely caught off guard. They're prepared for situations before they happen. And another part of this is how they gather information during fights. They're paying attention to how you move, how you build, how you react, and they use that information to adjust their strategy. If you always feel surprised or overwhelmed from random people, it's probably because you're not actively tracking what's going on around you. Once you start doing this, the game starts to feel a lot more predictable and easier to actually understand. The 8th thing is keeping their gameplay simple under pressure. And this is something that takes time to develop. When things get intense, most players panic and try to do too much. They overbuild, over-edit, and make things more complicated than they need to be. Pros do the exact opposite. They try to simplify everything. They rely on the fundamentals, they make clean and controlled plays, and they don't force anything unnecessary. This is what allows them to stay consistent even in high pressure situations. They're not trying to be perfect once again, they're just trying to make the best possible decision in the moment. And another big part of this is confidence. Because they've practiced their fundamentals so much, they trust themselves to execute even under pressure. They don't second guess their decisions, and they don't hesitate. If you want to improve in stressful situations, you need to focus on simplifying your gameplay and trusting your practice. The 9th thing is reviewing their gameplay, and I know you guys all hate hearing this, but this is something that almost nobody does consistently, even though it's one of the fastest ways to improve. Pros don't just play, they actually analyze. After games, they go back and look at what happened, especially big tournaments. They break down their fights, their rotations, their decisions, and they figure out exactly where they went wrong. And the key part is they're honest with themselves. They don't make excuses, they don't blame anything external, they focus on what they could have done better. And over time, this creates a feedback loop where they're constantly improving. They identify mistakes, fix them, and move on to the next thing. And another benefit of this is pattern recognition. When you review your gameplay consistently, you start to notice repeated mistakes, and once you see those patterns, you can actually fix them. If you're not reviewing your gameplay, you're basically leaving improvement on the table. The 10th thing is staying consistent, even when it's boring or even when you're burnt out, and this is what really separates pros from everyone else. Improvement isn't always exciting. A lot of the time, it's repetitive, it's slow, and it feels like you're not making any progress. But pros don't rely on motivation, they rely on discipline. They show up every day, they put in the work, and they trust that the results will come over time. And this consistency is what allows them to reach a level that most players never do. They're not doing anything magical, they're just doing the right things over and over and over again. And eventually, those small improvements add up into something much bigger. Most players don't get to that point because they're inconsistent, they take breaks too often, they lose focus, or they give up when they don't see immediate results. If you want to reach a high level, you need to understand that this is a long-term process. And once you commit to that, everything changes. But at the end of the day, none of these things are impossible. There's nothing here that you can't start doing right now. The only question is whether you actually will. Because once you fix these habits, you're not just going to get slightly better, you're going to feel like a completely different player. And if you want to keep improving, watch one of my other videos, and if you haven't already, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and start applying this the next time you load into a game. Comment down below what tip you think is the most important, and once again, thank you guys for taking time out of your day to watch my video. I love you all, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace, guys!